Assalamu alaikum and good morning everyone. So I welcome all for today's sessions about spacecraft system engineering. My name is Usman Imran and I am working as a research associate in SSTRL lab. So let's begin with today's workshop. So this will be the outline for today's session. It would consist of intro about systems engineering, which would consist of requirement, process, phases, and techniques that would be involved. Similarly, after that, we will discuss about system interfaces and PC104 stack configuration, which would consist of different type of protocols, I2C, SPI, CAN. Similarly, we will see about PC104 pin configuration, and then we will discuss some theory about link design and a little bit of demo about link budget. And after that, there would be a power and mass budget, that how do we calculate the power and mass budget for a system. So what is the purpose of systems engineering? So it provides basically when we have to develop a system. So in the end, the process of integration and during the phases also the integration takes place. So the system engineering plays an important role in that. So it describes that how system engineering adds values to the system, and if it has not been done properly, it may appear that at the time of integration, the error and faults may appear, which would result in the failure of the whole system. So systems engineering is a robust approach to the design, creation, and operation of systems. This approach consists of identification and qualification of goals, similarly creation of alternative system design concepts. We design some performance tables for that, and the selection and implementation that is made based on those tables. Then the verification process is carried out, and after that assessment is done that how well the system meets its required goals. So this approach is iterative, and with the passage of time, we make improvements and changes to its design, and in the end, it gets better. So again, the three major activities that are accomplished in this, the number one is development phase, which consists of controlling the design phase and providing the baseline and requirements. Then after that, it provides a structure for solving different problems and tracking requirements through the design effort. And the third one is life cycle integration, which involves the customers or end user design process, and it ensures that the system which is developed is viable throughout the life. So the function of system engineering is to guide the engineering of complex system. So there are some standardized discipline management process for the development of the system. So it provides simultaneous product and process development as well as common basis for communication. So this ensures that the correct technical tasks get done when during the development, planning, tracking, and coordinating phases. So what is the motivation for this systems engineering field? So as you can see in this picture, this is a ship that was designed back in 1628. So what happened that the center of gravity of this ship was not in the proper place, so it sank. Similarly, this building we can see it also destroyed at the point of integration or where the things were balancing. So these kind of integrating the things that is an important aspect whenever we are designing some system, whatever that may be. It may be a satellite, some building, or some ship. So the integration and the overall system understanding and development is an important phase in that. So what happens if the things are not initially designed or organized? So the problems emerged in the later phases, and the development system that could not be used further, and it could also cause the schedule delays and performance problems. So there is tremendous potential for wasted effort on large projects. So what happens is that when we are dealing with the large projects, and if we do not consider these things in the beginning and during the design phase, so in the end it creates the problems which would cause a lot of time delay in the projects. So the system engineering provides a systematic, disciplined approach for defining what each member of the development team would be doing and how it would be carried out for the success of the project. Okay, so with the passage of time, as nowadays more and more complex systems are being developed, so what happens is that when we are dealing with some large projects, which there is some cost and some schedule and some technical performance delays. So we have to keep in mind all of these things while scheduling. So the new space systems, which are larger and more complex, they require a high percentage of these systems engineering. Okay, so new space systems, they are more likely to have technology development, variety of subsystems, and they consider and reuse existing designs. Similarly, there are some commercial off-the-shelf components available which can be used in these systems. And the greater dependence is on the system models for decision and designs. And if there are more stakeholders and industrial collaborators, then we have to consider the requirements of all of those collaborators. Similarly, the more people, the project size grows with the number of people and number of development tasks. Okay, the other thing is that we learn from our past experiences. So system engineering is also based on that. We learn from our failures. So whenever there is some failure in the project, what happens is that they consider all of those things while designing some future missions and projects. So, and there is also a guideline book, the NASA System Engineering Handbook. It also points out different number of methods and different things which are to be considered. Similarly, some of the links are also provided. These are the NASA based, so you can learn more about. Okay, so what if we decline the system engineering expertise for some large projects such as satellites? So this here in the image, this is a future imagery architecture. This satellite, it was expected to cost around 5 billion, and it was a spy satellite. So, but it was cancelled in 2005 after 6 years of spending more than 4 billion. So the one of the factor, according to the American expertise system, is that the weight, risk, and the feasibility. So the test components and ensure that the pieces come together smoothly. So in the integration phase of the project, so as it is a large project, so when they design the subsystems individually and they combine them together. So in the beginning phases, like this was back in 2005, so there were problems that emerged during this integration phases. So that caused a huge loss of around 4 to 5 billion. So system engineering model begins with reductionism. So reductionism, a fundamental technique of system engineering that decomposes complex problems into smaller and easier to solve problems. The system engineering divides complex development projects by product and phases. So decomposing the development life of a new project creates a sequence of defined activities that would consist of need, specified, decompose, design, verify, and operate. So this is a block diagram for traditional view of system engineering process. So this all begins with the requirement analysis. So we understand the requirement and we determine how they will affect our system. And after that, we have function allocation block. And then we have synthesis or design block. So in design block, we identify a feasible solution that functions in a way which meets our requirements. And in the end, we have the system analysis, optimization, and control. So when we design a system, we optimize and control it for further improvement and betterment. And this is a loop cycle. So all of these things are interconnected, and whenever there is some new requirement or new changes, so this all loops back and it continues until the final product is achieved. So this is also the process flow diagram, but it is in form of the V shape. There are different models, like the previous one was a traditional model block, and this one is a V model, which is an extended view of decomposition and integration. And this also starts with the mission requirements. And then we have developed system requirements, a system architecture, and then there is a block for allocating performance specification. Then there are design components, and then comes the fabrication or assembly. And then comes verifying and integration phase. So in this we have verifying the component performance and then integrating them. After that, we demonstrate and validate our system. So this phase, this is called decomposition or defining, and the center one is the fabrication or development phase, and in the last we have integration and verification sequence. Okay, the last slide we discussed about the V model. So this is the advanced or optimized version of that. So in this one, they added optimization and control process, which are from number 10 to 17. If we look at them individually, so in the previous, we just see the whole blocks of requirement, then development, then integration. So if we see them individually, we have the stakeholder expected definitions in the requirement. Then we have technical requirement definition. So all these things are in the requirement definition process, which was a whole block in the last slide. Then the next one, 3 or 4, these are the technical solution definition process, which consists of logical decomposition or physical solutions. And after that, we have design realization process, which are at number 5 and 6. So it consists of product implementation and product integration. And then there are 7, 8, which are product verification and product validation. And on the 9, we have product transition. And the numbers which are in the optimization and control process, it consists of technical planning, requirements and management, configuration management, technical data management, and then decision analysis. So this was the V diagram, and this is an extended or exploded view of that V diagram, which demonstrates and describes the whole system engineering process. So the good system engineering requires competency in at least 3 domains. So what are those 3 domains? This consists of personal behaviors, domain specific technical knowledge, and then system engineering factors. So these 17 process activities, which are discussed in this model, this slide. So the good system engineering model must have knowledge about these 17 activities. And the personal behavior, it consists of team management, team leadership, developing and distributing tasks between different team members. So all these things comes in the heading of personal behaviors. It also consists of attitude, communication, your intellectual and self-confidence. So all these things comes under the heading of personal behaviors. And the domain related specific technical knowledge, it consists of that a system engineer must know about maybe guidance, navigation and control, or if they are designing some microcontrollers or onboard computers. So they must have know-how about all of these overall subsystem, propulsion systems, software engineering techniques. So these three overall combinedly create a good system engineering domain. So, okay, these 17 process, these are also mentioned in this added optimization block diagram, and it is also in this one. This is taken from NASA System Engineering Handbook. So if you look at this, these are the 17 points which we were discussing about in the last slide. So I already told you about these before. So moving on to next one. What is a system? So simply stating, a system is an integrated composite of people, product, and processes, and we utilize those capabilities and develop our or achieve our end objective. So this is basically a system. So there are some examples which are shown in these figures. So these are the team members, facilities, processes. This is a hardware. So overall, all of these make a system. So these are also examples of a system. Space shuttle main engine versus collection of parts. Space shuttle orbiter with engine and avionics. Space shuttle orbiter with solid rockets. Similarly, space transportation system with payload, launch pad, and then system. So, and then there is vehicle assembly facilities, trainer and simulators, solid rocket boosters. So all these are examples of these systems. So summary, this slide discusses about overall summary what we have discussed so far, that what is the systems engineering. So basically it is a robust approach to designing, creation and operation of systems. So necessary parts and development of every space project is carried out using that. And the function of system engineering is to guide the engineering of complex systems. And most space projects struggle keeping up with their schedule because of this. If they don't have efficient time domain system, so they will lag the schedule. Similarly, system engineering decomposes project in both the product and time domain. System decomposition and subsequent system integration are foundations of V and NASA system engineering process model. So this is also the 17 points or which are taken from System Engineering Handbook. So the system engineering discipline shall be applied throughout the project life cycle, and it is iterative, technical and management process. So this ensures and certifies overall system integrity. The project management, okay, the process of planning, applying and controlling the use of funds, personnel, physical resources to achieve a specific result. So we have discussed about systems engineering. So the project management is overall management of all of these resources, the physical person, HR and overall team. So this block shows the further subheadings which are considered in the system engineering practices. So if we look at the green block, it consists of design budgets. So what we do in design budget is that we describe our power memory requirements. Similarly, we have the communication systems or protocols. Then we define mass budgets. So we define our limitations or our requirements in this design budget phase. Then we have interface control. So it consists of the physical structural connectors and the software protocols and the signal processing techniques that would be used. Okay, so let's continue. And after interface control, we have this document organization. So documentation is also an important part of the project. So what happens is that whenever in the HR team, if we don't have efficient documentation, so when that team member leaves or so there is a gap in the communication or our requirement fields. So the efficient documentation helps achieving those goals. So in documentation, we should always document our requirements, materials, the CAD drawings, similarly safety documents and interface control documents. So all of these should be documented properly. Then we have acquisition strategies. In acquisition strategies, we have to decide that whether we would purchase some parts or we would have in-house development or we would have collaboration, or maybe there is a combination of all of these things. We purchase some parts and we also develop some parts. And then we have to decide these design drivers. We have to identify our cost, schedule, and performance. So this was the previous session. The previous module was about the introduction of system engineering. Now we will have a look into the different phases of system engineering. So the first one is feasibility. So usually these things are for the large projects, but when we are dealing with some small projects like the CubeSat development, so these time that are mentioned here, it would differ. So, but the first thing that is considered in every case is the feasibility. We decide our optimum requirements and then we demonstrate the feasibility of project. Then we have schedule, planning, and cost data for all of our systems. So this is a block diagram for the feasibility thing. The first one, we have some input from our customers. So basically one block is this one and one is at the bottom. So in the lower one, we have input from our customer in which we have system request, system requirements, interface requirements, and then we analyze those requirements, which consist of initial analysis, establishing technical or cost drivers, similarly seeking relaxation of most demanding requirements. And in the upper one, we have supporting technical analysis, which consists of system sensitivity or the parametric analysis of the system. Similarly, top level budget allocation, and all of these are connected further to different system definition and performance analysis modules. And in the end, we have to program and cost estimate our overall system. So the phase B, which is the next phase, this also lasts different according to different project. We have to design it during the design phase. So this phase is associated with the detailed design and definition. So the specific activities that are included in this phase are definition of the system and subsystem designs. Similarly, production of subsystem requirements and design specification. And then we initiate our C and D, which are the next phase. C and D, these phase consists of development, manufacturing, and integration of the system. So in the phase B, we have detailed definition about the system. Similarly, phase C, we have design, development, and integration. So the initiation of C and D phase, we identify our parts and components, then we assemble or manufacture them, then we integrate them. So after this C and D phase, we move on into the, and also there is a technology readiness level and some other parametric definition like flight readiness review. So these are the systematic ratings, which are kind of standardized, and when we develop our product, we determine it is based on which level of those reviews. So the next phase, which is phase E, it consists of mission operation and data analysis. So when the integration and verification of satellite has been done or some other project, so we move to this phase and we analyze the data which we are receiving. So phase E is concerned without getting the satellite into a condition when it can start routine operations. And the phase E1 normally includes shipment to the launch site and also the preparation for the launch. These are also included in this phase E. This is followed by launch and early orbit phase, which is the critical first few days of operation after launch. Then we have, this is followed by a commissioning phase where the spacecraft payload and any required infrastructure are brought into operational condition. And at the end of commissioning, we have the routine operations which rely on the ground support. So after system phases, we have a look into the system engineering techniques, what kind of techniques we have in the system engineering. So if we look into this block diagram, the blocks which are solid like this, they define the system engineering scope, and the blocks which have stripes in them, they define other program disciplines. And the elliptical dotted kind of area, this shows the interface area. So it consists of development. So this comes in the interface area, and these solid blocks, these are in the scope of the system engineering. This consists of requirement engineering, design and configuration, verification. Similarly, logistic analysis, operational engineering. So what comes out of the scope of system engineering? This production and the product assurance. This does not comes in the scope of systems engineering. So these are the system engineering techniques that are used whenever we are developing some project. So it consists of requirements, system specification, mission assessments, trade-offs, cost comparison, budget allocation, interface specification, and cost estimation. So this is expansion of the top level requirements. So on the top we have the system requirements or the customer needs. Then we have payloads and requirements, and on the other side we have mission objectives. So all of these are combined in the overall system requirements. And on the side we have the system budgets, subsystem budgets, and all of these things which are combined in the system requirements, they also lead to the subsystem level budgets. So we determine the requirements at subsystem levels also. So this is the checklist which we have to make sure exist in the system requirements. So this checklist consists of different kind of modules. The first one is mission requirements. Then we have to check the environmental requirements. Mission requirement consists of operational phase, end of life, lifetime, reliability, ground segment. And in the environmental requirements, we make sure about the ground activities, measurement accuracy. Similarly, structural or thermal inputs, radiation at atomic oxygen level. This is applicable in some of the project. And then we analyze about the autonomy. There are 6 things in the system requirements: mission requirement, environmental requirements, physical requirements, performance requirements, and PA product assurance requirements, and then AIV program requirements. AIV is for assembly, integration, and verification. So these are 8 main or we can say main modules of the system requirements, and everyone has further subheadings. So if we look into the physical requirements, we have access definition, dimensions, operational mass, disturbances, power, energy. So these are in the physical requirements. And if we look on the performance requirements, we need to consider the orbit maintenance, ranging accuracy, timing accuracy, similarly data rate, storage capacity, strength, and reliability. Okay, in the product assurance requirement, we have to check about reliability, availability, safety, cleanliness, storage, handling, and transport, and the configuration management. And if we see about the assembly, integration, and verification requirements, we have to make sure about schedule, model philosophy, and the facilities usage. And of course, there is a cost constraint to each and everything. So these are system requirements. So overall, there are 8 requirements, and every one of them have some subheadings or sub modules. So this is the block diagram for orbit options for missions. So we can decide our orbit according to our project. So we can either have a low Earth orbit, or we can design for geostationary orbit, highly elliptical orbit, or deep space missions like lunar missions. So in case of CubeSats, we usually make it in the LEO, low Earth orbit, which are at around 500 to 600 kilometers. So of course, there are some trade-offs in everything. So we use major evaluation criteria first for such trade-offs. So the cost is number one. We have to, which is a dominant factor, we have to consider the cost in every case. Similarly, the satisfaction of performance requirement. So the product which we are developing, it is, we need to satisfy the end user about that product. Similarly, there are physical characteristics which are mass, size, and power. We need to have some trade-offs in that, and there would be some limitations in case of power, size. So these are all considered in the design phase, and we have to keep a trade-off between them. So availability of suitable hardware technology. So most of the time we design or maybe give an idea of some product, but we also have to check that whether the suitable hardware is available for that or not. And we have to check the compatibility with launcher also. The launcher requirements and interface requirements, we have to consider them. Then there is the flexibility to encompass alternative mission options and reliability and availability. So it is almost impossible to guarantee a trade-off that is mainly objectives. So this evaluation criteria, it is exhaustive and independent, and we have to modify it according to our needs. So there is no standard like trade-off. So we analyze it based on our requirements and our missions. Next section is about budget, an important system engineering tool that is concerned with system budgeting. So at spacecraft level, the system budgets we usually make about the mass, similarly about the power, energy, pointing and stabilization, telemetry, and telecommand budgets. So there are different parameters in every of these budgets. So I will be demonstrating some of them. Similarly, there are data rate, storage capacity, communication link budgets, reliability. So all of these budgets, they have some parameters in them, and then some values are associated with them, and we have to make a calculation about them. I will be demonstrating about the power, mass, and link budget. So whenever we are developing some product, so we may have different kind of techniques. So it would be a sequential one, or it would be that there is a center body and all of the other subsystems are communicating with them. Or maybe it is an advanced technique, a concurrent engineering. So what happens is that all of the things, all of the sub modules and all of the team members, they have a communication between them. So the aim of this approach is to reduce the time and also to keep up the schedule for our project. So if we look at this figure, so we have an option that either we do the things sequentially, like we make some component or some module, then we move on to next one, then to next one. And if there is some modification, then again we iterate this cycle. Or there is a possibility that we have a centralized design, that there is a central body or module and everyone is communicating with them. And in the last, we have the concurrent design. So what happens is that all of the submodules are communicating with one another. So this is the more advanced and more efficient in terms of schedule, time, and cost. So usually this concurrent design approach is used whenever we are developing some spacecraft or some other projects. Okay, so there is a case study about the Cryosat. Cryosat is basically a satellite. So it was one of the largest or biggest satellite. So the purpose to demonstrate this case study is that why the organizations are shifting towards the smaller satellites, because what a bigger satellite can do. So what happens is now that there is a constellation of satellite which could also achieve the same task that a bigger satellite was doing. So let's have a review about this case study. So the Cryosat mission, it was designed to measure small changes in the thickness of Earth's ice field. So basically it was measuring the thickness of ice, this satellite, the purpose of this satellite, and the measurement of smaller ice gap and larger mountain glaciers. Similarly, the original idea was that rules could be simplified for Earth Explorer opportunity missions to enable them to be implemented more quickly and cheaply. This was thought to mean less rigorous quality, less reliable hardware, and perhaps less redundant systems. But in reality, it was difficult to implement two set of standards in a procurement organization where much expertise is drawn from outside the project team. So what this is telling, so this was a European Space Agency project. So initially they thought or implemented to make it at a cheap cost, but they had different organizations and they have a kind of collaboration. So what happened is that they tend up increasing its cost and its time and schedule. So let's have a further look. So this was the first Earth Explorer satellite of European Space Agency, and it was about 670 to 670 kilogram, and the power for this satellite was 800 watts. And what happened was that when this satellite was launched on the launcher, so after 300 seconds, the launcher burst and this satellite, it never came into work really. But after 4.5 years later, they made another version of this satellite, Cryosat 2. So that was launched properly and it was operational. So how did all this come about? So in 1991, the European Space Agency launched its ERS-1 satellite. So it has a pair of radars and it was in synchronous orbit, but it had a lot of weight, like 2.3 tons or 2,384 kilogram, and it consumed the power of 2,600 watt. So after that, the plans for more advanced missions were selected. So it consists of this POEM-1 satellite, which was collection of 19 Earth observation instruments. So this was a one big satellite which had around 19 instruments on board this satellite, and it has huge cost and size, and this was demised in 1992 because of its huge size and cost. So what happened that this led to the creation of two new satellites, which were Envisat and METOP, which are also shown in these figures. So this one was METOP spacecraft and this is Envisat spacecraft. So these were also based on the polar platform design, meaning that they were designed to measure the ice or glaciers in the polar regions. And this Envisat, it was launched in 2002 and it was weighing around 8.5 tons, which is 8,500 kilograms. So it was a big satellite. Similarly, this was also METOP. It was launched in 2006. And if we look at the tables of these satellites, so there are some parameters and values associated with them. So the first one is about METOP satellite, and this is showing the mass of payload, mass of instruments. So as we can see that it has huge power and mass requirements. Similarly, if we look at the other one, Envisat, that also had around the payload mass of 2000 kilogram. Similarly, the spacecraft itself was around 8000 kilogram. So what the purpose of basically telling all this is that how we lead to these small satellites which we see nowadays, cube satellites. So this is the story or history behind all of this. So these were the bigger satellites. And as I told you that they had on board like 13 to 19 instruments which would measure different things. So here is a list of some of the things. So if we look at them, that it had advanced very high resolution radiometer. What would it do? It was used for the global imagery, global sounding, ocean measurement. Similarly, if we see this one, infrared atmospheric sound or interferometer. So this was used in the ocean measurement readings. Similarly, cloud and earth radiation budgets. And there is a lot of list. You can have a look at them later. Okay, so all of this was happening back in this all started in 1991, 1992. So at the time of their launch, that was around 2000 or 2002. So what happened that there was another mission of NASA that was the afternoon train constellation. So what happened is that the instruments or the measurements that the biggest satellite of European Space Agency, which had on board like 19 instruments. So the NASA made a constellation of satellites and they all have different instruments on board. And they were also performing the similar tasks. So this was the first time when this concept of constellation or the small or we can say that dividing a bigger mission or project into smaller components. So both of these things were equivalent, but what happened was that one of them was bigger in size, it has huge cost, mass and power, while the other one was smaller and it has less time schedule and development phases. But the purpose of both of them were same. So this was the first one of it was launched in 2002, and as of 2010, the 15 instruments, meaning 15 satellites, they have been in constellation. And these cube satellites, they also came around that era, like in 1999, their design specifications were identified, and in 2002, 2003, they started to emerge and launched into the space. This is the history. This is the brief history about these smaller and bigger satellites. So the shift became towards smaller. Why? Because they were they have less ambitious missions and they were easy to manufacture, integrate, and keep them on schedule. So this is a little detail about IQBAN. You already may be knowing that the STRL lab is developing the IQBAN satellite, and the first one of it, which was IQ1, it was launched back in 2013. So far I have demonstrated the intro about systems engineering. Then we discussed about different phases or techniques about system engineering. And I told you a background about satellites, that how they were bigger in size and then eventually, or why they shifted towards the smaller size, because the same missions could be achieved by the smaller one. So now we will have a look into the system interfaces. So for system interfaces, I will refer to this document or a report. Okay, so we prepared this report while working on the IQBAN. So the first one in this is the Can you see it now? Okay, so we will discuss these few things in this document: standard interface, form factor, PC104 stack configuration, and the survey on CubeSat data buses. So as you all may have studied the spacecraft course, so can any one of you tell me that how the subsystems of the spacecraft they are connected together? Like what kind of headers or connectors they use? Anyone? Okay, how many of you have heard about PC104? Raise your hand. You never heard? Only you? Raise it a bit. 1, 2, 3. So, okay, you also. So you didn't study about it in some spacecraft course or the connectors or headers? Okay, so when we develop some satellite subsystems, so we have to interconnect them. So there are three possibilities that we can connect them. So the first one is the PC104, which is a kind of standard. And there is also a possibility that we use some backplane interface board. And the third one is complex programmable logic device. So I will explain all of these three one by one. We go on to the first one. So this is an image of GNSS receiver PC104, which is by Pumpkin Orkin Corporation. So if you see that there is a list of connectors, so we call this form factor as PC104. So basically it has 104 connectors on its board. So most of the spacecraft subsystems, similarly in case of CubeSats, they have this kind of form factor and they are stacked together, which are interconnected. This is the first form of standard interface form factor. And in case of PC104, there were different versions. The first one was released in 1992, then 1997, then 2003, and after that 2008. So they all have different kind of specifications, and link for their further description is also provided. So this is how it looks. You see at this one, the initial version, so it has less pins than 104 pins. And this is the PC104 Plus. And this is the PC104, which is kind of standard and is used in CubeSats nowadays. And there is a PC104 Express version. It has kind of three subdivided headers. And then there is Express 104. So they have different kind of headers and requirements and specification, but usually this PC104, we use this while the CubeSat development. And also the commercially available units for the CubeSats, they also have this kind of PC104 connector. So this was the first option. The other option we can have is that we make a standard kind of board or a main board. And what happens is that all of the subboards, they got connected to that main board. So if you look at this board, the pointer, so it has a lot of headers on it. So what you do is that you connect different boards, OBC, EPS, on their locations. So this is also a technique or the standard form of interface that can be used. But this is not much more rugged or reliable. So that's why PC104 is still used in the Cube satellites. So this is also the second one which I was telling you, the concept of backplane interface board. So you can see there is some camera module which is stacked on this board, and there are options for other boards which can be stacked. This is not that much strong connection or reliable. So that's why we opt to use the PC104. And then there is this third technique which we call as backplane complex programmable logic device. So what we do is that instead of developing different kind of stack connectors, we have a chip which is controlling the routing of all of these boards. So let's say that this is mission board A and this is OBC board A. So instead of their physical connectors, like in case of PC104 or backplane interface board, we have this chip and we can program and reprogram it according to our requirement. So we basically program this chip according to our requirement. So this is a conclusion about the standard interfaces. If we look at the first one, PC104, why we use it? Because it is stackable, it is rugged, and it has a lot of flight heritage. Similarly, it is compatible with commercial off-the-shelf components. And the backplane interface board, although it is portable and easy to use and easy to install and remove also, but it is not that much rugged or reliable. And this programmable logic devices, it is in the development phases. The technology has not matured that much yet, but it has some usage or flexibility and reusability are there, and in maybe in future there are some advanced versions of this CPLD technique. After system interfaces, we will have a look on the PC104 stack configuration. So these three standard interface boards, PC104, backplane interface board, and programmable logic device. So we selected PC104 out of those three, and now we will have a look at how this PC104 stack is configured. We will have a look at this later, but let's first discuss about the CubeSat databuses. Let's see how the SPI I2C or the CAN protocol are implemented. So this is a graph which shows the usage of different kind of interfaces that have been implemented in the CubeSats from the beginning of their time, 2002 up to until 2017. So as we can see that the I2C, it has been initially used a lot. Then the CAN is around 5% in case of launch and 11% to be launched. So we can call the CAN protocol as an emerging protocol. And the SPI, it is 43 to 50%. USB, it is 4%. Spacewire, 0 to 3%. RS-232, 45 to 53%. Similarly, UART, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, they are also between 0 to 3%. So from this we can see that the I2C, it has been used a lot. Then after that SPI and RS-232 or 485. And in recent years the trend is developing toward the CAN protocol. So this image, it is taken from a review paper. So now let's have a look at these I2C and CAN protocols, how they differ. So in case of I2C protocol, we have a master device and then there are a number of slave devices and they all are connected. We have two line buses. The one is data SDA and the second one is SCR clock signal. So its data rate is around 100 to 400 kilobit per second, and this is the configuration for I2C. And if we have a look at SPI, it also has master and slave concept, but there are different number of signal lines in this one. So in I2C we had two lines, STA and SCL, but in this case we have clock and master out slave input and master in slave output. And then we have this selection line also. So basically this has four lines, and in case of I2C we have two data lines. So this is a comparison between, so whenever we are selecting some protocol for our device, so we make a comparison between them. So the SPI, there are four signal wires, I2C have two, both of them are synchronous. So SPI, it has slightly higher data rate than I2C, and maximum distance for SPI is 10 centimeter, for I2C is 50 centimeter. The maximum possible devices up to 127 unlimited. And in case of SPI, we can only have multi-master is not possible. We can only have one master and other slave devices, but in case of I2C, we can have multiple. And the flow control is no in case of SPI, and for I2C, it is yes. So this is for the SPI and I2C. So now let's have a look at the RS protocol. So there are three RS-232, 485 and 422. So this is signal for the RS-485 protocol. It consists of mark, then space. So basically this is at a bit level. So you don't need to have a look into it. Let's move on to the comparison between RS-232, 422 and 485. So their cable single-ended. In case of RS-485, we have multi-drop. The number of devices in RS-232 were one transmitter, one receiver. And for RS-482, it was one transmitter, 10 receivers. For RS-485, 32 transmitter and 32 receivers. So in this RS series, we can say that the RS-485 is the most latest, or it has more data rate. So in case of 232, it is 1 Mbps, for 422 10 bps, and for 485 also 10. But the number of receivers and transmitters are more better in case of RS-485. The next one is CAN protocol. So this is the configuration for CAN protocol. So instead of the master or slave concept or what happens is that we have two lines, can high and can low, and we don't have some master or slave, and it works on the basis of the message format. So this node 1, let's say this is a block 1, some OBC. Node 2, we can say this is ADCS, we can say node 3, some other board. So they all have a CAN transceiver and a CAN controller on them. So whenever they want to communicate, they send a message on these CAN high and low line, and that message is in the format of, in this format. So there is a start bit, then 11-bit identifier, then we have different number of checks, RTR, IDE, and then comes the 8-byte data. And then also there are some check bits like redundancy check, acknowledgement bit. So this is the bit structure or the message format for the CAN protocol. So there are further two standardized CAN, like one is 11, one has 11-bit identifier and the other one has 29-bit identifier. So the number of bits of identifiers are different in each case, but the number of data bytes and the redundancy or acknowledgement bits, they are same in all of the cases. And then there is a spacewire protocol, which is used also by some of the largest satellites or maybe Mars rover. They also have these kind of protocols. But what the limitation or restriction is in this protocol, that they have specialized routers and hardware for their purpose. So this is not easily available for everyone or every user. So what we do is that we have to decide some protocol from I2C, SPI, CAN, or the 3 series of RS422, 485. So making a comparison among them and developing the trend, we decided to have the CAN for our IQBEN. So this was some detail about the different kind of protocols. Okay, so that was all in the protocol section. So if I summarize it, it has 4 to 5 protocols, I2C, SPI, CAN, and 3 series of RS protocols. And if we have to decide some protocol, we make it basis of comparison, and we check our requirement, number of transmitter receivers, and the number of and kind of data transfer format. Like it has, one has master slave, other has the message format. And as I told you that in the current development of satellites, the more shift has been toward the CAN protocol because of its message format and data rate also. And the number of devices, they can also be a lot of them. So the next, now we will move to PC104 stack configuration. So this connector, which I showed you, that most of the Cube satellites have this kind of connector and we stack them. So now let's have a look at how their pins are numbered and how we decide which pin will have what kind of functions. Okay, can you, last member, can you see this clearly? This slide? Okay, so the color sequence is that the yellow is for input and output communication, red is for analog reference, orange defines the control and status bits, Green is for remove before flight and some separation switches. Blue is for power, gray for transceiver, and black is for user defined. So most of these, if you look at this table, this column, it is numbered from H1 up to H52. So this is header 1. And then if you look at H2, this is also numbered from H2.1 to H2.52. So this is the header definition. This one is header and it has 52 pins. Similarly, the H2 header 2, it also has 52 pins. So now we have to decide that, okay, this pin will have power, this will have some I2C signal, but how do we decide that? So there is some standard for that also, and there are some user defined pins. We can also define them accordingly. So let's say that for example, if we have a look at some commercially available boards, so this one is GOMSpace NanoMind OBC. So if we see what it has on header 1 and header 3, we see that it has CAN low and CAN high signal. Similarly, if we check for the Cube ADCS, it also has CAN low, CAN high. So this is showing that it is kind of a standard. So whenever we route our board, so we have to put the CAN on pin 1 and pin 3. So this is one example for that. If you look at header 1, if you look at header 21 to 25, so they also have the SPI protocol signal. So if we are using, we need to define them at these pins H21 to 25. So this is also kind of standard. So when we define the pin for this PC104 stack configuration, the pins which are standard, we keep them as standard. And what we can do is that, let's say, header 2.48 up to 2.52. So these are user defined pins. If we have some payload or some other thing and it has some signals which we need to put on stack, so we can define them here. So we have choice of defining our pins here. But other than that, most of the pins are kind of standardized. As I told you about the CAN, which is on header 1 and 3. Similarly, if we have a look at the power buses, so we always have 5 volt at header 2.25, 2.26. So whenever if you are developing a board by yourself, it would be on same, and if you buy a commercial board, it would also be same. So the purpose is to maintain compatibility, so that if you buy some commercial component and some of you are developing yourself, so you can stack them together properly. So this is the purpose of this PC104 stack configuration. So if I summarize it, it has 104 pins. Some of them are standardized and their pin numbers are defined already. And there are option for user defined pins. We can define them according to our payload or requirement. And so this is all in the PC104 stack configuration. Next thing is about link design or link budget. So anyone of you have studied about link design or link budget, maybe in spacecraft engineering course? You are working on the CTEC link budget?
सर आप लिंक लिस्ट की बात कर रहे हैं
लिंक लिस्ट मतलब नहीं ये डिफरेंट चीज है. Okay, there is some theory involved in link budget also, but as we don't have much time, so I will move toward the practical demo of link budget instead of explaining the theory. This is a sample for link budget. It looks something like this. There are different parameters. It has elevation angle, modulation scheme, then we have transmitted power gains. You can calculate link budget either theoretically, and there are also some tools available for that. So if you calculate it theoretically, there are a lot of equations and formulas. So you have to put values in them manually, and then you find some output for that. So these are all formulas for the link budget. And if you use some tool like this Excel sheet, so basically it is developed by this Jan Aking, a communication engineer from some university. So this is famous tool. Most of the people have used it in their thesis too, and also for their calculation. So I will be demonstrating some of the parameters and link budget calculation using this tool. So there are different tabs at the bottom of the page, which are labeled as title page, transmitter, receiver. So we set different values in these cells, and then the formulas which I showed you in theory, they are automatically updated in this table. So this is the first page, which shows some introduction and color scheme. So what it is telling is that the blue box, this is for data entry cell. You have to put some value or number in this one. And then the cells which would be yellow in color, basically they have some formula at their backend and they will be updated automatically. And similarly, there are other numbers like the pink one. This is simply a subtitle. So what we have to do is we enter the number in the blue cells. So if I move on to the first one, this is the orbit sheet tab. So if you have a look at this, as I told you that we would be entering data in the orbit or in the blue colored cells. So what we have to write here is 1, 2, 3 or 4. So what it determines is that 1 is for LEO, lower Earth orbit, 2 is for high Earth orbit, and 3 is for geostationary Earth orbit. So the cube satellites, they are in the lower Earth orbit, so I put 1 in this column. And we have to define some altitude for our satellite. So let's say it is at a distance of 600 kilometers. So we define the apogee and perigee for that. So it may be either circular orbit or slightly elliptical. So let's say I put 610 and 590 in these cells. So what it does is that it automatically updates this altitude and all of the other parameters. So I just put these, and the theory which was behind these orbit, it is updated automatically. And there are also some other parameters which are being shown in this figure. So what is slant range? It is distance from the Earth station up to the spacecraft. H is the mean height above the surface. RE is radius of Earth. This is formula for S distance. So when we select our orbit in the first worksheet, then we move on to the next tab, which is for frequency. And as you see that the values from the previous sheet are updated here automatically. So we selected lower Earth orbit, slant range is this. And the formula for path loss, which is one of the important loss which we have to consider in the link budget. So that is also updated automatically on this sheet. So we have to select our frequency for our orbit, which, as I told you, in the blue colored cell. So the uplink frequency for our system is 145.8 megahertz, which is at number 1. So I put number 1 in this tab. And the downlink frequency is 435 megahertz, which is at number 2. So I put 2 in this cell. Okay, so the next one is for transmitter. If we move to the transmitter tab, there are also some blue colored cells. We have to give some number or value for our system in those cells, and they will be updating accordingly. So the transmitted power, which is the ground station in the SSTRL lab, so it is around 50 watt. So we write 50 watt in this cell. And then there is length. So there is an antenna on the roof, which is right above the SSTRL lab. So the distance of the cable from ground station to antenna, we have to define those things here. So as I write, 42 meter cable is there, then 3 meter, 4 meter. So all of these are for our system. And then we write cable loss per meter. So the cable which we are using for our ground station, we get this number from that data sheet. So we write all of these things here, and what happens is we get total line losses in the end, which is around 7.83 dB. So this is a way to calculate these values. So this one is for ground station. If we move downward, there is also for the spacecraft. So we have a telemetry board on board spacecraft, and which is transmitting a power of around 1.6 watts. And the cables between different connectors, which is around 0.075 meter or maybe 10 centimeter, 20 centimeter. So we write all these and we get total line loss of 2.9 dB in our onboard spacecraft telemetry TT&C board. So this was for transmitter. Then we move on to the receiver. So basically the cables and the connectors are same. So you may notice that these values are same for receiver also. The same cable length. We have to define some temperature values here. For ground station also we write the same values 42, 3, 4. And in the end it gives us and calculates the line losses for our system. The next tab is about antenna gain. So the first one is uplink antenna gain, which is at a frequency of 145.8 megahertz. So as I told you, we would be entering values only in the blue colored cells. So this one is blue and this one is blue. So we have to write some number or values here. So this one is 4. Why we used 4? Because let's say if we have helix antenna on board on our roof for ground station, then we write here 2. But in our case, we have Yagi antenna, which has gain of around 10.2 dB and bandwidth of 52 degree. So we write number 4 here, and the polarization is RHCP. And in case of spacecraft, we have dipole antenna, which is at number 2. The polarization is linear. Similarly, we write for downlink also. So that's all on this worksheet. Moving on to the next one, we have antenna pointing losses. So we have to define some theta or error values for our system, which is usually or basically 5 degree and 20 degree in our case for ground station and 20 degree for the spacecraft onboard TT&C board. For downlink, it is also entered as same. Moving on to the next one, antenna polarization loss. So this here is telling that if our antenna is circular, we have an axial ratio of 1.0, and if it is elliptical, we have either 2 dB or 3 dB, and in case of linear, we have infinity. So the antenna in case of our ground station, which is on roof, that is circular, so we use axial ratio of 1 for that. And the antenna which would be on the spacecraft onboard, that is linear, so we use infinity or some high number like 30, 40 for that instead of this one. So we enter those values in this table at the blue colored cells, and the rest of the things, they are updated automatically according to the formula. So if you want to know the theory behind them, you may refer to the link budget or link analysis theory. So you may find that the similar formulas have already been implemented in this sheet. The next one is about atmospheric and ionospheric losses. So there are some tables and we have to decide the number or value for our system, and we just write it in the blue colored cells. So if we keep on moving like this, then there is this modulation scheme, which is BPSK in our case. So after that, this is the final sheet we have. After entering all these values, the uplink budget for our case, the ground station is transmitting around 50 watts power or 17 dB. Then there are different losses which can be seen here. And in the end, we have the system link margin. So all of these things are calculated. We just write our desired data rate in this system desired rate tab. So what is the basically need for calculating all this? So we just want to make sure that our link budget or link system is closed. So it is closed when we have number greater than 0, and if it is less than 0, that means that the signal receiving and transmitting would not be efficient. So this analysis has to be done for making sure the performance of our system is proper. So this is all in the uplink budget, and the downlink budget, it is also updated similarly. So the summary for the link budget is that there is a theory behind it which has different formulas, which consists of that receiving power, transmitting power, antenna gains, and then there are some tools also using which we can analyze our systems. And as I showed you in that Excel sheet, how we can calculate and determine whether the performance for our system would be all right or not. So this was the purpose of link budget calculation. So the next thing is power and mass budget. In power budget, we make calculations for the power requirements of our system. So in case of IQBAN or Cube satellite, we have different subsystems, EPS, OBC, RX, TX, TT&C board, ADCS, then there are payloads, camera or some other device. So we need to calculate that how much power each board is consuming and how much energy we are generating from solar panels. So that's why we need to have this power budget or power related calculations. So for example, if we have a look at EPS power budget, so you may notice that the component names, then their part numbers, quantity, and then the unit power per part is also written. So in case of current sensor, you can see that there are 16 current sensor on EPS board. Each one is consuming around 16.5, and then the total power for them is 264 milliwatt. So doing this, we calculate for all of the things: microcontroller, FRAM, crystal, 20 megahertz. So in the end, we get a total number that, okay, our EPS board is using 1.6 watt or 1684 milliwatt of power. And similarly, we calculate for the other boards. One of them is TT&C board. So if we look at their number, there is a microcontroller, then temperature sensor. And if we look at overall number, it is around 1.4 milliwatt, 1446 milliwatt power. So in the end, we combine all of these power and see that in case of Cube satellite, we have solar panels mounted on the sides of the Cube satellite. So after analyzing all of these powers, we see that whether the power generated by those solar panels is equivalent to our desired power or not. So if it is within the range, then we can go on with the deployed solar panels. But if it is exceeding the requirements, then we need to have some mechanism for deployable antennas, deployable solar panels, so that we can generate more power for fulfilling the need of our system. So this is the purpose of power budget, why we calculate power budget. Similarly, there is a mass budget. Okay, so why we calculate mass budget? Because when we design a CubeSat, we have certain limitation for the mass of the structure. Let's say for case of 1U, we can have up to 1 kilogram, because if it exceeds that limit, the launcher, they do not accept that and it cannot be launched. So in case of 3U Cube satellite, we can have up to 3 or 3.5 kilogram. So if we analyze the system for our case, so we need to have the mass for different subsystems of IQN. If we look at structure, okay, it is around 1.1 kilogram. EPS is around 520 grams. Similarly, batteries, control board. So when we do all the calculations, it has to be in the range provided by our launcher or our design requirements. So in this case, it is around 3.5 kilograms. So we can say that it is in the range of the requirements. And let's say if it exceeds those limits, so what we have to do is that we reduce some system, or maybe we change some components so that it can be accommodated in those limits. So this was all about it. We discussed today an introduction about system engineering, followed by different phases, system engineering techniques. Then I discussed about PC104 stack configuration and standard interfaces and protocols. And in the end, I gave you a little demo about link budget, power, and mass budgets. So that was all in the today's session. If you have any questions, you may ask. Okay, so that's all for today. Thank you all for listening.